The mariners who made globalization possible in time period 4 included Columbus with his travels to the Americas in search of a better trade route to India, Zheng He with his exploration of the Indian Ocean, Prince Henry for starting the first navigation stool, and Da Gama from India. The technology that made it possible was the astrolabe, maps, wind patterns, and caravels, which allowed Europeans to travel. The global circulation of goods included the silver drain in China, joint stock companies competing against each other for global trade with the East India Company and the Dutch East India Company, and the Columbian Exchange, in which crops, diseases, and livestock were exchanged from the New World to the Old World and vice versa in the Middle Passage or the Atlantic trade system.
The impact of interaction, focusing on religion. Islam spread to Afro-Eurasia. Over the centuries, the rift grew until by 1500 CE, it was politically solidified by the conflict between the Sunni Ottomans and the Shia Safavids. Plus, where it went, it often took on local characteristics. Christianity spread around the world. Christianity went global at this time. About 40% of the Catholics today live in Latin America. As it spread, it diversified. Along with the spread, the religion split into two camps, Protestant and Catholic. Buddhism also continued to spread at this time, mainly to Southeast and East Asia. New forms of religion also came about, like voodoo or Vaudan in the Caribbean, cult of saints in South America, and Sikhism in South Asia. The impact of prophets at this time was also very relevant. The prophet was often spent on visual arts. In Europe, they went through a renaissance. In Persia, there was a development of miniatures. Wood block printing came about in Japan, and codex came around in Latin America. Literacy also expanded, and some popular authors at this time were Shakespeare from Europe, Cervantes also from Europe, Sanlada from Mali, Africa, Journey to the West in China, and Kabuki in Japan.
The global demand for raw materials and finished goods expanded, requiring corresponding increases in peasant labor and production. Peasant labor increased, of course, as well as coerced labor, especially with the introduction of the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery. New ethnic and racial and gender hierarchies also sprung up during this time, such as the Manchus in China and the Spanish Creoles, which grew from widening global economic opportunities and imperial conquests. On the social side, European men depended on Asian women as the traditional merchants of the region. Family sizes also grew smaller in Europe. Racially, the mestizos and mulattoes became part of the America's social system for Spain.
There were different ranges of coerced labor used in the European colonies. There was the Spanish use of ink and mita. This was the Spanish subjugation of Incan system of labor for the greater good. In reality, the crown used labor to mine silver. There was also the encomienda/hacienda system. In theory, this was supposed to be a Spanish colonial system where the Spaniard would receive labor from locals in return for teaching them Spanish and Catholicism. Then there was the indentured servitude. Indentured servitude was a temporary labor that was used to pay off a debt incurred by the servant until the debt was paid off. Finally, there was the chattel slavery. The chattel slavery said that people were personal property to be bought and sold. This was the original form of slavery. People during this era used many different ways to maintain their power. They used arts, religion, treatment of subjects, and bureaucracy. Some examples of these include architecture and court literature for arts, divine rights in Europe, and human sacrifices for religion, Ottoman dhimmi, Manchus in China for treatment of subjects, and Ottoman devshirme and Chinese civil service exam for bureaucracy. The Manchus, Mughals, Ottomans, and Russians had majority of the land empires during this era. for maritime empires, it was majority of it was made up of Portuguese empires, Spanish empires, Dutch empires, French empires, and British empires. There were also lots of competition for power during this era. Competition for trade routes persisted between the Ottomans and Europeans, and there were also the piracies going on in the Caribbean. There were state rivalries also, such as the 30 Years' War in Europe, and also the Ottomans versus the Safavids in the Middle East. Not only that, there were local resistances, such as the peasant uprisings in Europe and the samurai revolts in Japan.